Speaking of great Cornwall lights, former NHL coach Doug Carpenter collaborated with Judge Gilles Renaud to write a book. Here's a little bit more.
Thank you, Amanda. Today I'm joined by Judge Gilles Renaud, as well as the legendary Doug Carpenter, coach of the 1980 Memorial Cup champion Cornwall Royals, as well as the New Jersey Devils and Toronto Maple Leafs. And I'm sure we could add a few more teams along the way. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess one of the major reasons we're here today, fellas, is we're talking about this book and the reasons for it and where the profit's going to go. But first and foremost, Judge Renaud, tell us why you wrote a book about Doug Carpenter.
I suppose there are two parts of the story. I moved in, neighbor of Doug's, and introduced each other, and it was all fun. And Doug's a very nice fellow, and I said, Doug, how come I can't find a book about you at the local library? And Doug was very modest and said, well, who'd want to read a book about me? And I said, well, you know what? A lot of people will be interested. You coach Team Canada. This is my particular connection because I'm not from Cornwall originally. I knew about the Royal success, but I remember very well 1985 when Doug led Team Canada in Czechoslovakian Republic and in Prague, and he beat the Russians in the medal round. That hadn't been done in 30 years. So that was my strong memory of Doug. And Doug simply dismissed it, and I went on, borrowing a hose and a roller and a sander and everything that neighbors borrow from neighbors. And the next year I went back and I said, Doug, you know what? I want to write a book about you. It's a bucket list thing. I want to write a book about a sports biography. And Doug dismissed it again. He was, too modest. But, I did what every smart man does. I went behind his back and spoke to his wife. And his spouse says, yes. And on the sneak, she agreed to give me all the scrapbooks, the yearbooks, the mementos, the memorabilia. And they were leaving for their winter holidays. And Doug finally agreed, and he helped me bring the stuff over. And I started reading, and I started writing. And every few days, I'd send Doug a draft chapter, and he'd send his comments, and, this person was important, and this person was important, and from there we had our conversations. And the end is a book, and we're both surprised it worked so well.
And we're very glad it is because of the where the profits are going.
Now, Doug, before we get into the profits, I have to ask you first and foremost. Everybody knows that you have a rich history in hockey. We've seen it, we've witnessed it, we've watched it on TV. But when we look at Doug Carpenter over the years, if people want to see Doug, they usually see him on Pitt Street gardening. You're a pretty quiet, reserved individual, and we respect that. But now you're at the forefront. Gilles Renaud here got you to the forefront, and you've agreed to do this book, and tell us why.
Well, for one reason, the reason for the garden is my father's, that was his passion. And also, back when I was very, very young, that's how they made their extra money to buy the coal, to barter their 100 pounds of flour and 100 pounds of sugar, and so on and so forth. I hesitated at first because...
At first, at second, at third?
Because, I approached this just as a job. It was a job that's a little different than what the ordinary person is. It does require a few more talents and so on and so forth. But it was through Art Anderson, who was my phys ed teacher at St. Lawrence High School, who was my idol and still is and still was until he passed away. I wanted to make a career of sports. Naturally, I wanted to be a baseball player, because I love baseball. I could sit and watch baseball all day on TV. But unfortunately, when I went to a couple of training camps for the New York Yankees, that they used to have these circuits come around with the certain scouts and so on and so forth, I found out that I just wasn't as good as I thought I was. Therefore, let's try and show something else. And fortunately, I do love hockey. I have loved hockey. I've made a living out of hockey, and the rest is history.
Now, why did you agree to do the book, and how did the judge, finally convince you?
Well, he did convince me. Being a judge, if you don't go, he's liable to get you one way or the other. I have in each place that I coached, the booster clubs used to, and including Cornwall Royals, they'll pick a person and they'll make a scrapbook for you during the year, and then in the final banquet at the end of the season, they would give you these scrapbooks. And I think there was 23 of them. Mm-hmm. And I really cherished them, and they're downstairs in a certain spot in the basement. So that's what I gave to Gilles, and as fast as he reads and as much as he retains, I've never seen somebody that can remember things as well as he can. That this is how it evolved, and he would read the scrapbook, he would write a chapter, he would send it to us, and we go to California in the wintertime in an RV, and I would look at it and rewrite a little bit of it, give some more clues and so on, send it back, and that was the end of its chapter, and that's how the whole thing evolved.
Rewrite consists of taking his name out of certain credits and putting other people forward, but the thing that people have to understand, and Doug is modest about it, he only agreed when we said, well, why don't we just do this, and whatever we can make from this will contribute to the Children's Treatment Center. So I thought that was a splendid idea, that we could do something for a local charity, especially one that helps children. And the more he thought about it, the more his contribution increased. I won't say to what extent his contribution has increased, but basically the book, in effect, sells for $30. And everything is going to the Children's Treatment Center. In fact, if you buy the book at the Children's Treatment Center, you get a $15 tax receipt. So in effect, Doug has bankrolled the book so that the contribution to the Children's Treatment Center will be even greater. And that's really the hook that got him. Well, if we're doing something for the community, but he's surprised at the outpouring of affection. I mean, the book launch we had at the public library, there were at least 3 people who claimed to have been classmates of him, all named Douglas, who were all in the same class taught by Doug's late mother. So that was an interesting situation. And Doug said, whenever my mother said Douglas, the person at fault knew exactly who was being referred to. So that was an interesting tidbit.
Well, we're going to continue the conversation in the next episode of Local Matters, but before we wrap it up for this episode, I want everybody to see the book, and it's called A Royal Career. And you know where you can purchase it, Children's Treatment Center, and again, you're helping a great cause. We'll see you on the next episode of Local Matters.